Hey everyone, it's Mario. Welcome to another episode of the We the Trust podcast. In every episode, Eric Chang and myself discuss living a life of overflow in each of our 5 pillars: spiritual, emotional, mental, physical, and financial. Join us as we train to be better at being the men God designed us to be. Better images of Christ, better husbands, better fathers, businessmen, and leaders. Our hope is that these conversations challenge you to desire the life that God meant for you when He designed you. So tune in, take notes, and connect with us as we enter the fray of manhood.
Are you were you 690th fittest man in the world last year?
Oh, I doubt it. That doesn't sound right. No.
Because I Googled your name and it said you were 690th worldwide. I was like, hey, this man is fit.
Oh, maybe in Masters. Not.
Oh,
yeah, maybe in the
okay.
Masters. Yeah, I mean, maybe.
Oh.
I don't know. I haven't looked.
He's fit. He went to
Okay, so that
you went
is
to
you.
you went
Okay.
to quarter, right?
Yeah.
You went to quarterfinals.
Oh, you're fit,
Yeah.
dude. Come
Yeah.
on,
I mean,
man.
Mario, you're right there, brother. I'm just keeping up with Mario. Yeah.
No. I may have like a pound or two on 1 or 2 lifts on Nick, but pretty much Nick dominates everything else.
Unless we're pressing overhead,
bro,
brother.
man, this is cool that this is you. Because I was looking, I was like, wait, I don't know if this guy even does CrossFit. So,
My last name's weird enough, though. There's not many of us.
yeah, it's a pretty unique last name, but yeah, you were 690th last year in
I'll take
age
it.
rank 35 to 39.
Yeah, see, so I don't know even what is it, 690 out of 700?
I mean-
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, but this is We the Trust, man. We're season 4, Eric. This is kind of crazy that we are in the thick of season 4. We took a little bit of a hiatus, and then at Eric's prompting, honestly, it was like Eric's like, "Hey, we got to start doing this thing again because it's life-giving. It's life-giving to me. I know it's life-giving to Eric." But this season's all about transparency, and we tend to choose our guests based on attributes that we feel might serve not just our community, but kind of give a little bit of a boost to our own lives. Like we choose quality people to be on the podcast. Obviously, that's why you're here, Nick. I think you're very much a quality person. We've had sidebar conversations here and there. We've hung out a little bit outside of the gym, which has been cool. Doing ministry type things, which has been also life-giving. And I just see your work ethic, and I think you're just an amazing human being, and I want to get to know you better, but I also want our guests to get to know you. So, would you do us a favor of just giving us a quick little intro? I have an intro here, and I could read that, but I'd rather hear it from you.
Yeah. Well, first, thanks. Wow, I'm honored for all those words, but and I'm grateful for your friendship. Definitely, it's cool to have a friend in the gym, but it's even better to have a brother in Christ, and it matters a lot. And a father who cares and loves his family. I mean, all those things matter because that's the person I want to be too. So, I'm Nick. I'm married to Tracy, 4 kids. We've been in the Army essentially all of our adult lives, except for the break that I took while I was in seminary and then working at a church to gain what the Army wants, which is church ministry experience. It was an incredibly formative time working in the church, and then I essentially returned to the Army, and where I served as an Army chaplain. So that's what brought me to Hawaii. And then in the background of all that, I love to read and love to work out and love to just be present with my family. So those are essentially the 3 things that I do when I'm not working or with you at the gym.
I love that. It's like, there's simple things, right? It's like, I think that, and Eric, you tell me if I'm wrong, but the more high quality people that we have on here, the simpler their lives sound. It's like, I do these 3 things. I do these 5 things. That's it. That's all I do.
Mhm.
So that's all the time I have. I have time for my family. I have time for my work that I have to do. which usually I love as well. And I have some time for me to kind of like to build my mind, my body, my spirit, right? And I'd love to. We kind of gave you the open-ended question, like, what do you guys want? What do you want to talk about, right? And transparency has been on Eric and my heart this last few months, like maybe last quarter of the year. We've been talking about transparency. We've been seeing a lot of moral failure in friends and family, and in the public eye with pastors and things like that. And we really started talking about, like, what does it look like to live with like radical transparency in one's life, because we really think that that's the core root of moral failure, I believe. And Eric and I have talked about this, because when you're not transparent, when you're not accountable, then you're just kind of left to your own devices, and we know that that's a place that can become a slippery slope very quickly. And so we left it to you, and I'd love to just kind of dive into what you feel is really what on your heart right now. And obviously we can talk about marriage and relationships. I think that's a cool place to start. But really, I think the core of transparency starts with our relationship with God. And I'd love to just dive into that with you. And what does transparency mean to you in that area, and maybe even holistically?
Yeah, transparency with relationships is a pretty great place to start. You are right, but that isn't out. It's more like an outgrowth of our own posture before God, our own posture to ourselves. And it's interesting how much we lie to ourselves. Certainly, how much of how easily I can lie to myself about silly things and about big things. But with transparency before God, transparency is a really actually quite a value in my mind. It's a valued characteristic in I think what I would call just our present age, because transparency and authenticity are kind of like synonyms. And there's this philosopher named Charles Taylor who says we live in the age of authenticity. To be authentically you and real is very important, very, very important. But when I think about it before my Lord, authenticity and transparency before God, my first thought, you know what it is? It's like, is it my transparency before God? Is that me just being like, okay, God, I'm a dirtbag. I am. Is that what it means? Do I just beat myself up all the time? And I do think there's probably an awareness. Transparency before God does force us to have a self-awareness. It's just fascinating how, if we're going to talk about transparency before God, we first have to talk a touch about transparency to self.
Yeah. That's good. Okay, so what does that look like? I know exactly what you're talking about. When we talk about, like, transparency before God, and our minds, my mind definitely always goes to the negative. God, this is what I've done wrong. This is where I've fallen short. This is why I'm coming to you. I find myself in certain times when I'm not being truly authentic in my relationship with God. I find that I go to the negative because it's easy. It's like, I know where I've fallen short. I know where I'm lacking. And it's almost like just regurgitating it back to the Lord, who obviously knows everything. So what does that transparency with oneself entail?
Yeah.
How do we do that? How do we do that healthily?
Yeah, just a couple weeks ago in our lectionary passage. So I'm an Anglican priest who serves as an Army chaplain, right? So we follow, most of the time, our communities follow what's called a lectionary, right? And so the readings and what we preached on just a few weeks ago was just this great passage about John the Baptist. He's baptizing a bunch of people. But Jesus is kind of well into his career at this point. He's also baptizing people, and the text isn't super clear, but it makes it sound like they're baptizing at the same lake. And John the Baptist's disciples, who are loyal, they're like, John, like, there's this guy here, a Jewish man. He's asking, like, basically he's asking, where do I get baptized? Is this the better baptismal place, or over there, like where Jesus, like, but John basically gives that famous line that it's like, well, look, I mean, he gives a metaphor first. A metaphor first is like, I'm just the bridesmaid, bro. That's the guy. Like, I'm not the groom. That's the groom. But then he says, like, he must increase, I must decrease. So I think there's clues to transparency in scripture. Transparency being kind of a modern note, I think a modern idea, but there's clues to it. Like John the Baptist didn't say, like, no, he didn't go straight to his dirtbagginess. He went to actually, like, something that I'd like probably us to go to, which is like, no, I do have a role in God's overarching drama of redemption and renewal for the world. Like the cosmos is being renewed, but Nick Stavlund before God just understands his limited but still very vital role in God's story. So I don't know. I mean, I love chatting about this, but that's my first thought. What does transparency look like for John the Baptist? It's this understanding his role in God's redemption, realizing he's not the groom. Yeah.
I love that as you're talking about John the Baptist, and I'm like thinking about back to him and his words and his role and Jesus's words of him. Jesus is like, he was the best. He was there's no other prophet, no other Old Testament prophet who's better than John the Baptist. Like he was the epitome. And John knew his role, and he's like, hey man, I'm background. I'm a stagehand. That's the leading man right there. Right. And there's this Hebrew term that I learned in these last few years. I was looking up the word humility, and in Hebrew, humility is translated as anava, ANAVAH in an English transliteration. And anava means to take up the space you are given, and that's what the Hebrew mentality of humility is. It's not to regress back from it, and it's not to push the bounds of it. It's to fill the space that has been carved out for you. And Jesus's words for John was like, he did that perfectly. There was a space carved out, and he filled the space with all that he had and all that he was. He wasn't trying to limelight. He wasn't trying to like be in the limelight. He wasn't trying to do more. He was trying to fulfill. And I think that's an important like idea for us to think about. Like when we have this idea of transparency before God, and obviously, and Eric, I want you to chime in here like as much as you want, obviously, but as we approach that idea of transparency before God, we have to take ownership of who He has made us, not what our lower idea of us is. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. It's well said. I mean, what a great Hebrew word. Holy cow. They tell stories. That's a good one. I mean, yeah. And I don't really have a response other than to say, I appreciate how, like, the image that comes from that, which is this is who I've created you to be. And yet I feel like if it's a Jewish model, if it's a Hebrew word, it's almost always plural, right? So it's like not just you, but it's y'all. It's y'all transparency, not just you. And that's always an important point to remember. But like, it's only, I think, when we start thinking about transparency before God as seeing our role and what God desires our role to be in the world as a supporting role, then I feel like now we can talk more about like the other stuff, which is like, oh, okay, well, this similarly applies to my marriage, right? Or this similarly applies to work relationships or just relationships in general, right? But
Yeah.
to me, it does kind of starts with understanding what transparency looks like before God, which we're saying part one is just simply knowing your role in the story. But there is a piece to part two being, I think, not that we wallow in our sin and say, oh God, I am so filthy. There's a place for repentance, certainly in the Christian calendar throughout the year. Like there are seasons where we maybe emphasize repentance a bit more. But in the church fathers, one of my favorite is Gregory of Nyssa. He was just a few hundred years after Christ. He talked about the spiritual life as one that begins in the desert and then moves to the mountain and then ends in the cloud. But in the desert, there is this point where you're like thirsty, recognizing the end of yourself, recognizing your need for something beyond you. So part two, I think, of transparency before God is kind of recognizing the desert of our existence in some ways.
That's good. Nick, I was listening to your other podcast about the idea of this "we do you do you" era, and it really really resonated with me, and it really resonates, especially me being, I think, like we're close in age. I'm like a late mid slash late no early slash mid millennial, as opposed to like someone in their late 20s right now. I think of millennials as like that age, but I'm probably on closer to like Gen X. Um, and then there's Gen Z, right? That's growing up right now. And that's Gen Z is definitely like the epitome of like the you do you era, right? They're living in it right now. And I think a lot of it comes from this um a place of, can't think of the right word, but I would say a place of privilege, maybe a place of like life is better now than it was for the previous generation. Maybe like there's been many generations of, especially if you come from like a like second generation in like immigrant family or something like that, like life tends to get better over time in terms of like all of the modern day definitions of better, right? um and I think one of the tensions that I was feeling as I was listening to you share, and as I hear you talk about, I think the first thing is part one is knowing your role in the story. I think that's really critical, and that's really important that um men and just people recognize that, is that we have a particular role in the story that God has put us in, and that we are not the main character, right?
Mm.
And I think that's really hard for today's society to hear that, right? Like, people talk about, I mean, it's even like a meme. It's like, oh, main character energy, or like, oh, like, be like, be the, it's time for me to be the main character in my story and stuff like that. And um, how do you balance that? Like, how do you, what do you say to that?
I mean, ownership matters. So I don't want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to miss it.
Yeah.
So extreme ownership, Jocko. Okay, I got it. I see what they're doing. Extreme ownership does matter, and certainly too the parable of Jesus, where he talks about a master who leaves, but before he leaves, he gives a ton of money to one servant, a lot of money to another servant, quite a bit of money to another, and then like a year's wages or so for one, and he leaves, and nobody said, well, we just need to let go and let God take control. No, like the assumption is that folks would play their role in the story and to like take ownership of what of who they were. Who were they? They were like on the master's team, right? And so
Mm.
the servant, of course, who didn't do anything was chastised pretty heavily, right? And you could take that as like a works righteousness thing, is like you got to work and earn. But I actually think it's not that way at all. Anytime I feel like we feel the pressure of like performance, we're probably thinking more like Americans and less like ancient Christians. But I think probably the more like the so-called point of that parable is simply playing your role, like understanding who you were kind of anointed to be, which anointing, I guess, in the Christian tradition is baptism, and seeing it as a gift. The master's disappointment was a deep sadness, and so I love your question, Eric. There is this balance between extreme ownership. Like, it is your life, Eric. It is my life. I have to figure out
Yep.
what I'm going to do. We can't divorce ourselves from the current age we live in, which is an age of unprecedented individuality. The quote, "You can do anything you want to do." I mean, that's a crazy burden. Actually, it's a gift, but it's a crazy burden. But one way we can help bracket our Christian brothers and sisters and our sons and daughters in is to give them the freedom to choose, but to help them understand how their choice might matter in God's overarching story. So it's, hey, what do you want to do with your life? Could turn into like, how do you want to be God's hands and feet? What does that look like? Do you want to
That's
like balance the budget at a company? Do you want to be an accountant? Do you want to, what is this? Do you want to work in our community? What is our community, this community we live in now? What do they need? What do they need? And what do you think you could do?
That I feel like that posture of, I mean, uh, me relating that to this idea of going to like the desert place and then the mountain and the clouds, and I feel like it's almost like this picture of a lifetime of surrender over time, right? And me, I'm in, Mario's a little bit old. I think you're at the midway point between myself and Mario, right? So you're like 40, you're 40, right?
About
And
to be, yeah.
and how old are your kids?
14. I got 4 kids, 14 down to 6.
Okay, so your youngest is a year younger than my oldest, right? So we're in a different life stage, and Mario's a little bit closer to me. We have kids that are like 7 and 5, and I got a 2-year-old as well, almost 2-year-old. And I look at this season of my life, and to give you some context, and I think you could help answer this, and using me as a avatar for men that are listening. But I come from the fitness industry. I'm 36 years old. I've owned a fitness business for 10 years. I've been coaching for nearly 20, and I've seen even our industry change over time. But I've seen myself change over time. I've seen like I've grown as a person. I've grown spiritually. All 5 pillars that we talk about in We the Trust, I've grown in those drastically over the years. And I just come back from last week. I just come back from this trip from Dallas. So I go to like these mastermind meetups, and it's like the most entrepreneur thing that you can be in. It's like everybody's like a high level performing gym owner, um, like people that have like gone beyond just being a coach to like actually creating real businesses that employ other people that make real income doing a profession. It's like it's not a hobby, right? And I come to these like um I guess checkpoints in life where it's like, okay, like I hit a 10-year mark this year. And I heard you talk on the last podcast with Darius,
Darius, yeah.
Darius, and you guys were talking about the idea of like being a mountain man. And there's this like tension that I feel all the time where I feel like I'm like, dang, like I have hard, like strong moments of, dude, I just want to sell everything and live like a way simpler life. And then on the other hand, like I want to have a Porsche again. And it's like this is like tough, and it's like
Yeah.
it's this, and it's like it's interesting because like when I look at my 25-year-old self, like it's not even really about wanting things. It's about stewardship, right? At each level of stewardship that I've been given, I feel increasing burden. I feel more responsibility. I feel more. I feel more of attention to not only am I responsible for my own family now, but I feel kind of responsibility over my staff and then their family, right? And it's really, really hard to take things that aren't mine, but then like, how do I balance that tension within this greater picture of, man, like what actually is my calling in this specific season? Was that even a good, like, is this question making sense to you?
I think it is.
Um,
Let me just ask a clarifying. So like you the tension is between blank and blank. And if I'm hearing you right, the tension is between the draw, is it towards like simplicity versus what's the tension? Can you
it's like being really driven, being like, like
hard
hustling
charger?
entrepreneur,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, hard charger, high
Success.
Mm-hmm.
success, yeah,
Yep.
and
Which is a
wanting those
beautiful
things,
thing. Okay. Yep.
I feel like for even for the right reasons, right? But then with those with wanting those things comes like all this pressure and stress that comes with it. And it's like I have to read Matthew 6:25, 26 all the time. Like about the birds and not worrying. And I'm like, man,
Oh
why can't I
shit.
be like why can't I be like the bird, man? What's wrong with me? Like, just eat some freaking seeds and chill out. You know what I'm saying? Like, what's wrong with me? You know? And like, I can't do that. And then on the other side, it's like I have moments where it's like I'm just super grateful, and I'm like, man, like I'm just so grateful for like like platform I have, for what I'm able to do, like what God has given me to exercise, and like, but it's like it's this constant like hard yo-yoing back and forth, you know?
Yeah, and it's actually you Eric, you highlight the tension, not just of your own individuality, but the tension of our current age, which is called the secular age by some. We can talk about that later, but like only now do you have the freedom to ask such questions, right?
Mm.
You have the freedom to choose, and that freedom of choice, the choice, or at least our assumption that you can choose, is that you could just have this life of simplicity, or like dial back down, and or you could keep grinding. And um, the binary choices always make me nervous, because there's always that third way. And I know you. I'm sure you feel the same way. But hearing you talk, there's like the cultural answer, which is easy. That usually comes to my mind first. And then when that cultural answer comes to my mind, I start asking questions about, okay, how is this different than what I know of Jesus? Because what I know of Jesus is what I know of the Father, right? So the cultural answer is always like, go tiny home, bro. Sell everything, just kind of like live on a farm. And that's cool. Like there's nothing wrong with that, because we do live in the you do you era. You can do that, and that's a benefit. But then the scriptural message is way more nuanced than that. And well, I don't, yeah, like I did Greek and Hebrew once upon a time. I don't remember much, but the one of the few Greek words I remember is called telos. It's kind of like your aiming point, your end point. And so it's a question that I ask of like my chaplains and my team and myself a lot. Like, what is my telos? Like, what am I aiming at? What's my end state? And if we're going to talk about the desert and Gregory of Nyssa, let me just highlight something of Nyssa, who, again, just a few hundred years after Christ, he talked a lot about knowing self. He didn't use that language, but like he would talk about looking at yourself in the mirror, and then as you see yourself being formed into God, you then see Christ. So it was always like a self-driven thing that went upward. Okay, self to upward. And one thing I appreciate about what you're asking is that you're not just asking, what do I want to do? But you're asking like, okay, well, where's like, what does this look like in light of God's story, my role in God's story? And my answer to you is just simply to keep asking the questions and to keep praying and to keep praying about it, because it's a tension. But I would encourage you, like, resist sham values. And you know what sham values are. It's you can have a Porsche, that's okay. But wrapping ourselves up in the Porsche, probably not okay.
Yeah.
It's just, you could just tell. Like, not long ago, I was at Universal Studios with my kids, and we were sitting behind a family, and my kids are all watching like the Universal stuff. We were on the trolley doing the Universal tour, and but I was listening to this dad talk in front of me, talk to his probably like 13-year-old son, and they were just talking about like stuff they wanted to buy, like gold chains and what cars are the best and stuff like that, and like. I don't know. They're probably great people, but I did just think to myself, man, what are those like? What are we like? They are definitely communicating about what matters, and it seems like those things mattered a lot. It's easy to identify sham values in other people. It's harder to identify them in my own life.
Mm.
But um, grind culture, man, Eric, you asked some deep questions, but like a good pastor, I think I'll just ask you questions back and ask. It's rhetorical. You don't have to answer it now, but I'd be curious how you see the telos of your life.
Oh yeah.
Um, I mean, I know you'd answer something probably like Christ likeness, things being more like Christ, and that's a beautiful thing. But can I just say something that you mentioned at the beginning? Talked about male identity, and there was a way for us as males to divorce ourselves from just self, and it was called an initiation rite. It's where the community sends us out to do something probably hard that would probably scar us. Like we would probably have a physical scar coming home from whatever it was the
or
community
die. Yeah.
or die. Yeah, death was probably but you came back and you now had a new role in the community. So it was never about going out to find ourselves. It was always about, well, it wasn't only about that. I mean, there's parts of that. You go out and you learn about yourself, but you come back for a new role in the community. And the role, Eric, you talked about as like a business guy, you got employees, you got family members. Like, it is a heavy burden. It is a lot to bear. And it's certainly, that's the role that you've inherited in your community. But we've done a lot of that stuff without our initiation rites. So we kind of wake up one day and we realize, holy crap, all these people really need me. And it's heavy.
Yeah, it's powerful that you shared that story because I have a tattoo on my shoulder right here, and there's like a wolf, like kind of like it's like a silhouette of a wolf, and in the looking into like a sunrise with like in the forest and stuff like that, and it's a homage to the movie 300. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie 300, but it's
Oh
like
yeah.
it's gory, intense, man, hoorah type movie. And there's a scene where the boy gets sent out into the forest, and it's where the community is sending him out, and they're like, hey, like come back wearing the wolf or don't come back at all. And it's interesting because I think there's a tension in society, especially among males, where there's like a fear. First of all, there's a fear of initiation. That's one. And the second is like there's also I think there's also false initiation now. I think because
Mm.
there's no way for men to do it properly. We're now forced to self-initiate without community, without something official. So now it looks like, and this is not a knock on what the dad and the son were talking about, but it's like, oh, like make enough money to go get that chain. Like that's like, grind hard enough to do that so that it's I'm gonna say that, and this isn't like me standing on the box saying this, but like I feel like my reasons for wanting that Porsche like are probably very different from the typical person's reasons for wanting one. Like there's different stories that I've experienced that make me want this thing. And not to say like I'm better because of it, but I think for most people it's like because society tells you that if you have one, you're successful, right? Um,
Hmm.
so I feel like that tension, while that's there, I'm like a question that I keep asking myself is, you know, I've shared with Mario before. I have this prayer that I pray every day is like, God, like, don't give me any more influence than my character can handle. Like, may my character always be stronger than my influence. And then my second thing I pray is may I never have resources more than I am able to steward. Right, like those two prayers, I feel like I pray those to try to keep me grounded and like my mind's like, hey, like when you have that for me, God, I will be ready to steward it. Hopefully, but I don't
Mm.
want anything beyond that. Um, but I yeah, that tension is just it's really real. And that I feel like that's a struggle for me in that conversation of what you were talking about. This like in being transparent and authentic with myself. It's like, what does that even look like?
Yeah,
Yeah. Can
Eric,
I?
I think
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think you're frozen, Eric, but
Oh, really? You can
yeah,
hear me though?
I can hear you clear.
I,
But
Mm.
I'll let Nick respond.
man, I loved the comment about initiated into, well, you essentially asked the question, initiated into what? You know, I mean, I've been doing the army thing, you know, for a while, right? And so I've seen people rotate in and out of combat, thinking combat would be
Mm.
the place where they would initiate something would happen, initiation, and it's woefully disappointing because I've been on different types of deployments. I've been on the deployments that are kind of boring. Then I've been on deployments that you wished were kind of boring, right? So like you kind of see both, and on the ones that are like, there's never the sweet spot where you're like, what does that look like? Where I guess what would the sweet spot be? I'm being kind of facetious, but like would be just enough firefights where guys could feel like, oh, I am something, but enough downtime and we're not losing people that, they go home happy. I guess, I don't know, but there is no sweet spot. And it just doesn't work. Guys are either bored and then they feel like they're wasting time over in some country, or it's the opposite. And they're thinking, okay, I'm ready to go home now. So baptized into what, right? If we're talking about transparency before God, and part of transparency before God is actually just a little bit of transparency to self, like who am I? What's my role here? Then I feel like identity comes up. And Eugene Peterson is like a pretty popular writer. I mean, of course, the Message Bible, he was the translator for that. And one of my favorite quotes is he's talking about how society sells us sham values, how society sells us kind of like lies about what it means to be human and who we are. And his response is, I must always remember that Jesus is king, that prayer is my mother tongue, that Eucharist is my basic food, and it's not Myers Briggs who tells me who I am. It's my baptism. Because in the ancient way, right, baptism was like an identity forming thing. One of the first documents written after the closing of the New Testament canon. So it didn't make the cut, but it's still a really good letter. It's called the Didache, Didache. So it looks like Didache, but it's Didache, the teaching of the 12. Didn't make the New Testament canon, but it's a lovely document written probably in the 2nd century, maybe as a collection of just sayings of the people who followed the apostles. So it's kind of like the disciples. And the image of baptism given in that document is that it's through living water, aka flowing water. And it actually recommends cold water. I think because even then, baptism represents a little bit of pain, a birthing experience. But the image is that you'd be on one side, the postulants, the soon to be baptized, and the community would be on the other side, and they'd baptize and they'd walk through the water and enter into a community. And baptized into what? Combat baptizes you into nothing. You're worshiping in the temple of Mars at that point. But we have been baptized by water and spirit. And that you can't divorce that you can't take that away. So any initiation rite we talk about for men or for women or anything has to involve our identity before God, which I think, starts at conversion and culminates in baptism. But yeah, that's cool, Eric. Man, good thoughts, brother. And you're unfrozen now.
I am unfrozen. Good to be back.
One of the things that I actually wanted to touch on, Eric, and this talks about, I think this goes throughout what we've been talking about today, but I think the tension that we've had many conversations of is what success is, right? And you constantly asking yourself, well, am I successful now? Right? Instead of just almost walking in your success and knowing that you are successful and you will continue to be successful because that's the not just role, I think, but that's the honor that Christ has gifted you, an ability to be successful. But it's not just a given. It's because you've put the work in, and it's almost the remnant of your hard work and your work ethic, because you've known who you are and you know your role. And so I would kind of like ask you the question, what changes in that mentality as you start questioning, well, do I do this or do I do that? Or do I do this or do I do that? And why can't you have simplicity in your success? Why can't you live in the simplicity of your success? And it's not like that's not a condemnation statement. It's actually me asking you, what does simplicity in success look like? Can you simplify what success means to you so that you're both fulfilled by it and can equally walk in it? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or or is the desire to always want more because of what we look at
It's
around us,
yeah.
right?
It's for me, it's like I'm pretty good about not doing the whole like I don't feel jealous about what anybody else has. Although my wife would argue differently, and she probably knows me better than she would say. She would argue that she knows me better than I know myself, right? And I'm like, really, you think that? Like, and if she does, it creates that tension in me where it's like, oh, okay, what's true and what's not, right? But for me, at least from the narrative that I follow and I genuinely believe is that like I'm not one that compares with externally, like, oh, this guy's done this or this, and like I want their success. Um, I think for me, the challenge has been to give some context is like I've like survived 10 years of like I started my business when I was 25 years old. And at 25 years, you're like soul searching. Like you're trying to like figure out your life and who you are, right? And I think God used this vehicle to teach me to become who I am today um, over the course of a decade. And now I've, in terms of like worldly achievements, like I've achieved more than I ever could in this thing that I do, right? Like, and as a gym owner, when you can like make a teacher salary and your kids can like eat food, like you've already won. Like, so it's like that's so from that point of view, it's like, okay, you're doing kind of okay. And then now it's like it's grown much beyond way more than that now. And I'm doing things in the fitness industry that the like 99% of coaches will probably never be doing. And I think when you it's almost like you get to this mountain peak, like you're hiking and you go from peak to peak to peak. And you get to this peak and you're like, okay, you look down and you're like, what am I supposed to climb? You know, like where do I go from here? And I think that's the constant tension that I feel is like, yes, there is some successes in that. And like um and God's been like great through it. Like I like there's been like in the last 2 to 3 years, it's been incredibly missional. Like it's been the like one of the biggest questions I had in my 20s early on was like, how do I balance this tension of I'm a business owner, but I'm a Christian. Am I a Christian business owner or am I a business owner that's a Christian? And there's this back and forth of like, what does that even mean? Like how much of church and state should be separate in my operation? And it's crazy because it was a real question that existed like in the back of my mind and in my heart. And I don't have to answer that anymore 10 years later, where it's like, oh, like it's neither or. It's just be yourself and just be you and who God made you. And that's all it is. And I've been living in that for like in 2 to 3 for the last 2 to 3 years. And the fruit that's come from that has been incredible. And there's a woman from my gym just got baptized in someone's jacuzzi like 3 weeks ago. Right. And it's like, holy crap, like to be able to just b- place play my role in that story because this thing exists is incredible to be part of that. But there's also still that tension of like, man, like, what else am I supposed to be doing other than legacy planning for my kids and like, chase, like, what am I I just came out from that master, and then it's like to answer the success thing. It's like I asked the guy that runs my mastermind. I'm like, hey, like, do you have a number? And he goes, yeah, it's 20 million. I was like, oh, well, you actually have a number. Like most people don't have a number. And he goes, it's 20 million. I was like, what's the 20 million? He goes, well, 4% of 20 million will give me $1 million a year. And that's more than enough that I need to not only like provide for my family, but I can be like grossly generous. And then like the money is put into all this. It's like stuff that like, I don't know, I'll ever think about in my lifetime. Right. But it really made me think about like, well, do I have a number? Like, and it's just it's this constant, like, I don't know if that even gives more context. I don't know if that gives more context to that tension that I feel, right? It's like, what is the next thing that you're supposed to do if you are already successful, you know? I don't know. It was
I
just,
keep I keep thinking back to the Greek word that Nick was talking about, telos, right? And it's almost like that North Star, right? And I think that, and you kind of mentioned this, Eric. It's like, going from mountaintop to mountaintop. The thing is, I think we mistakenly make our telos the mountaintop, as opposed to the journey with Christ.
Mm.
Right. And so if I'm on mission with Christ and I know that I'm on mission, then my world is open to me, because my goal is to stay on mission with Christ. And everything that I do is to draw people to him through me. To simplify mission, right? So if that's my goal, I can do that small, I can do that big, right? It doesn't matter where I set my sights on this earth to achieve or accomplish, because my mission is the same. And I can fulfill it. I can fulfill it with a Porsche. I can fulfill it in a tiny home, right? And if my focus is to do that, then I will allow Christ to do that through me. It's not Jesus, take the wheel. It's, hey, Jesus, you gave me this rad car. I'm going to drive it till the wheels fall off, and then I'm going to die. And it's going to be awesome. Right. Yeah. I think you highlighted something that in the Devo that I had put out, Eric, and it was like, I want to be so exhausted by the time I reach heaven that I can barely kind of walk up the steps, because I've spent it all here.
Yeah.
Right. That's my goal. And, maybe some would call that short-sighted or whatever, but I know that whatever I put my hands to, the end result is Jesus drawing people to himself.
And I think that's also like, that also plays to the exact tension that I feel. So for example, it's like, imagine, I'm going to draw an analogy to what you just said, is like,
Sure.
it's like living in that obedience. For example, if I know, let's say we'll call it a 400 meter. We'll use that as the measurement. Okay. And let's just say that, let's say I run a 110. That's fast, man. That's a fast 400 meters. But then in my mind is like, can I have run a 108? And I think that's like the Christian life, is for me, is where it's like, did I leave it all today? Or did I, and I think that's the tension of, like, was it good enough?
So-
Like I'll sit there and I have like my journal. I have my Mario journal, and then I have my James Clear journal, and at night, and I'll check off my list for the day. I'll reflect. I'll like do like a second FaceTime, and I'm like praying, and I'm just like, man, like there's seasons where I'm like, man, God, like I'm doing everything that you're calling me to do. It feels really, really good. But then there's moments of like where it feels like seasons of almost like wilderness a little bit, or it's like what am I like? I know I'm on the right track, but I don't know if I don't know. Yeah.
I'll let Nick chime in here, but I wanted to just touch on something. I think I find this in athletes a lot, right? Where it's like, man, could I have run a 108, right? Instead of saying, man, tomorrow I'm going to run a 108. Right. So it's like, it's perspective. And I think that perspective has a lot to do with achievement and direction. It's like, okay, I ran a 110 today, and tomorrow, man, I ran a 111, but I'm still striving towards a 105. And I know that if I keep doing this, I'm going to get better and better. So it's progression, not perfection. And it's not regret for what I did today. It's reflection of what I did today, and saying, okay, how's that going to make me better tomorrow? Maybe I ran a 120 today because I wasn't feeling it, got bad sleep. I'm not making excuses, but I'm seeing why, and I'm seeing what I can adjust and make changes for tomorrow so that I can do better than I did today. Right. So anyway, just want to say that.
Yeah, it is hard to divorce grind culture from discipleship. Because
I would have never thought of those two the same sentence, but yeah.
For sure.
Well, the Pharisees were grind culture people,
Mm.
and they were, if they were athletes, they would be the people who in interviews were like, I just love to suffer. So put me on that air bike.
David
Let me,
Goggins.
yeah, that's right. Let me just crank 50 cals on the air bike for the team. And the rest of us are like, oh my, okay, you're crazy. And oh my goodness, there's so much goodness to what was you guys just talked about. In one of my favorite books on Revelation called Reading Revelation Responsibly, Uncivil Worship is like the subtitle. It's a must read for Army chaplains, but it's a really good book. And honestly, the first couple chapters are where you make your money, and then I think the conclusion. But he highlighted something to me that I hadn't thought about, especially in the Revelation when there's all the warnings to the 7 churches that were like not doing well. But he kind of steps back as a New Testament scholar and looks at the overarching message of Revelation. And he concludes, and I think he's right, that the metric of performance, which is just a vomit-inducing word probably for a New Testament scholar to hear, but like the metric of performance was faithful obedience to the Lamb.
Hmm.
So to be obedient to a Lamb who was crucified means that we're not obedient to like the man who values power and prestige, right? And so just the beauty of what we're trying to talk about here and the complexity of it is that we're seeking faithful obedience to the Lamb, which allows us to drive a Porsche or a Lexus, or allows us to like live well. And what a beautiful thing! Like Joseph of Arimathea, I am grateful he had a lot of money, right? Because he cared for our Lord in the burial. He provided that. We need people like that, right? So I'm grateful, but in the midst of it, we're trying to be faithful, obedient to the Lamb. So like, well, what does it mean to worship a God who was crucified and who is risen, a God who didn't, who values almost the opposite of what grind culture values, which is mountaintop to mountaintop to mountaintop. What a great point you made, Mario. The telos becomes the mountain versus the telos for us being faithful obedience to the Lamb. Man, what a nuance. But the gift is the burden, I think. The gift is you can chart your own way. You can figure out how to be a faithfully obedient, well-to-do businessman. Congrats. And oh, by the way, God would love for you to participate actively in his program for redemption for the world, so that when he returns to set all things right, you and I, by the power of the Spirit, will have already gotten some work done with him and for him. Man, cool stuff. Yeah.
I love that. I love that picture. Just like when all is said and done, we've already had work done,
by the Spirit. That's right.
Just, man, it's a powerful image. Nick, it's been amazing. I want to make sure that we get to our kind of like final, like we call them our fast 5 questions that we prompted you with in your questionnaire. But I'd love to just open it up to you and say, is there anything that is on your mind that we haven't really kind of touched on, or that you'd love to kind of just freestyle on for a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's important to say this. What we think being human looks like is going to drive everything else. And that sounds super academic. But if I think being a man looks like ... then it will affect the way I raise my kids and talk to my wife, the way that I work with people, and certainly the way that I look at myself. If I think being human means I have unlimited choice to curate my identity, unlimited choices for all things about how I create, then, that's going to affect the way that I relate to people. But if I think being human is to be like Christ, because Christ was the only full human, fully human, fully divine. So he was the most human one, right? Then all of a sudden, being like Christ makes me more human. And to be more human is to be more like Christ. And then that spills over to everything. Tracy, you can have the passcodes to my phone. Tracy, you can we share all the money, right? Transparency just becomes this outgrowth of what I think it means to be human. Because kenosis, Philippians 2, when Paul talks about Jesus, who being in the very same form of God, didn't exploit that God, his divinity, but poured himself out. That's the word we use for in is kenosis. He poured himself out. That's what I think it means to be human. It's a pouring of ourselves out. It's a humility, it's a meekness, right? So I love that we were kind of chatting about that without chatting about that throughout today. But if you're going to ask me to riff on something, that's what I've been reading and thinking about a lot over the last couple of months. And I'm glad to be able to share that.
Love that. It's great. Eric, you wanna lead us off in the little fast five action?
Yeah. So we have a quick fast five that we're going to ask is number one, what is your spiritual practice and how do you steward your relationship with God?
Oh, okay. I'm an Anglican. So which means I'm a Christian who worships on Sunday in the tradition that comes from the English Reformation. It really sounds so dumb when I say it out loud. Oh my gosh. But my daily program is what's called the daily office. It's straight out of the Book of Common Prayer. It's my fitness program. It's what I do. And the beauty of that is that I know that there's millions of other people in the world kind of doing it with me, right? The communion of saints. So there you go. What was your second part of your question?
Is that a Pete Scazzaro thing?
No,
Scazzaro?
Okay.
He might be. I don't know if he's Anglican, right? But this is like the Book of Common Prayer. Oh man, that thing's like,
it's
that's
ancient.
old. Yeah, that's ancient. Yeah. So yeah.
Right on. Very cool.
The other part was just how do you steward your relationship with God? But I think we touched on that a bit. All right. So we have five pillars: spiritual, emotional, mental, physical, financial. What's your emotional practice? How do you steward your heart, your feelings?
I get 8 hours of sleep.
That's good.
It's huge. It is. He talks about simple. If I'm well fed and well rested, yeah. I've got a couple. I've hit my head pretty hard in the Army and the result of that is I've had to learn how to manage my emotions really well because of just what it does to your brain. And I'm not being silly. If I don't get sleep, that's okay. I'll be fine. But I know that it's probably going to bring on a different part of myself, and I'm going to need a little bit more. I tell my teammates too, if I do a lot of traveling or deploying if I'm with one of my guys, I'll just be like, hey, just so you know, I'm doing a timeout right now. I'm with you, but I need about like probably 20 to 30 minutes of just like power down. So I don't know. That's a really silly answer. It's really way more practical than you thought it was, but
it's good.
Yeah.
It's actually
not practical.
just silly, but it's scientific too. I think.
Yeah.
I have a health consulting gig that I do on the side, and one of the things I'm sharing with next week is I'm doing some corporate wellness, and we're talking about like how do these busy sales guys take care of themselves while they travel the world like multiple weeks out of a year, and like they think like there's no magical hack. That the secret is like, hey, actually, the first thing I recommend that all my clients do is get good sleep. And the reason why is if you can control the factors of your sleep, first of all, you can get 7+ hours of sleep in like a dark room. If you could, like I always say, if you're in a hotel, go and crank that AC up as cold as you can. Like get that AC up as cold as you can and get in as dark of a room as you can. Because if you can sleep well, your first response when you wake up is not going to be exhaustion. And because that's like the first step in affecting your cycle of how you want to eat. Because now when you're tired, well, what's going to help? Glucose for your brain. Your brain can't function. So like your cognition is off. You don't feel good. You're more irritable with your kids in the morning. Like, so you're spot on with that. That definitely helps with your emotions. And that's why
100%.
that's why punishment, like to mess with you emotionally, like what did like the CIA and the NSA do is they give you sleep deprivation typically.
Oh, I
So
know. Yeah.
yeah. Do you have a mental practice? How do you steward your mindset or your mind?
Hmm. How do I steward my mindset? Yeah, that's got. Oh gosh, what a great question. I steward my mindset through community.
Mm.
Uh, so fitness community that curates my mindset by keeping me dialed in on my goal, which is just consistency over time. But when I'm with my worshiping community, or when I get to mix it together with Mario, who's a brother in Christ, who's also in my fitness community, right? Then it reminds me of my ultimate telos, which is, to me, that's mindset, which is likeness of Christ. I mean, so when I think of mindset, I think of likeness with Christ. I think of just the bits and compartments of my life, like whether it's fitness or work, and each one of those has a community, and they help me steward my mindset, because one of my major goals just in life is just consistency over time in whatever area I've got, and I can't do that alone.
Mm. That's awesome. So you touched on this next one, your physical practice. Like how do you steward your body and health?
Yeah, GPP, general physical preparedness. I mean, that's CrossFit. It's a GPP program. I don't specialize. That's just it's helped me stay healthy, which is funny because most people think, oh, CrossFit, you'll get injured. Well, no, because I'm not overdoing any particular
Right.
muscle group or pattern. So yeah, that's it. I need to be able to show up somewhere, work out, and then go home and go to work and check the block for the day. So that's what it is.
Awesome. You got this last one here?
Yeah, man. How do you steward your finances? Do you
Mm.
have a financial practice?
I mean, we do. It's discipline. That's how we do it. We say no to a lot more than what we say yes to,
That's
which
good.
thankfully we did that early on when we were poor, and it's just paid off. But and I'm not being silly. It truly is. I mean, like we've the military allows us to meet with like financial advisors for free, and that's excellent. And so that's helped over the years. But I mean it. It has been discipline. We say no. No is a holy word in my house. And daggone though, I love cars. There's a lot of stuff I love. I do. Like I am a cars guy. I love a lot of stuff. So sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's hard, but it's a habit over time, right? It's consistency.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Love it.
Okay.
Nick, thank you so much. Why don't you give us a way to kind of connect with you? I know you have a podcast.
Yeah, that's pretty much the only way. I'm not on a lot of socials just for my job, but Inspired Human Podcast is a podcast that my friend Darius and I, both of us are Army chaplains, we've had for quite a while. We're doing seasons at a time, and you can connect to it with us that way. And it's an extension of our in-person ministry, and it's something we love. So that's how you do it. Inspired
Awesome.
Human Podcast. Yeah.
Or Jump Ship CrossFit. You can connect with Nick there.
That's
Tuesday
right.
and Thursday or
Mhm.
Saturday mornings. Nick, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Appreciate you. It was a great talk. And we talked about a lot today. So I hope you guys were blessed. And thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us today, guys. For more content, you can find us on Instagram at We The Trust or at wethetrust.com. If you'd like to connect further with Eric, you can find him on Instagram at Coach Eric Freedom. And if you'd like to connect further with me, Mario, you can find me on Instagram at the Mario Quesada. We'll see you next time.